it's fascinating to me how easily someone in one religion can find the fallacies and biases in another religion.
I think that what's fascinating,
you're razor sharp on your criticism of Islam here.
Yeah, but what I find fascinating, Jeff, is that you recognize that with other religions, but you don't do it with your own. Because
that may be the case. I'm just saying. And there's that confirmation bias coming up again.
This is Apologetics Live. To answer your questions, your host from Striving for Eternity Ministries, Andrew Rappaport.
And I'm back. Well, okay, we're only for a little bit. We're going to have a special show tonight. We're going to be having, again, if you guys paid attention last week, we didn't quite get to finish that discussion. And so Dr. Anthony Silvestro and David will continue their discussion. We're going to have some other discussions. So we want to remind you, if you want to come in, ask any questions, we welcome that. All you have to do is go to apologeticslive.com, apologeticslive.com, and click the duck. I know it's silly looking, but that's the way StreamYard does it. Their icon is a duck. So just click the duck. That brings you in. You just have to log in with either, I think it's Facebook or YouTube, something to verify you're actually having an account somewhere, and then you can come on in. So we're going to do a informal discussion is what or informal debate tonight. Excuse me. I will try not to be coughing throughout the show. But I'm going to bring Anthony in. Oh, he was just going to go for his sip of water. Okay, go ahead. Drink your water. No one will see you drinking water.
I'm good. You're out, so.
So tonight, the topic of discussion, at least the first half, is going to be dating of the universe, correct?
Apparently. So, for the second week in a row, we were going to do just an informal discussion. David thought that he should prepare an opening. So I guess I'm flipping through the slides now. I guess we're going to be discussing distant starlight and age of the Earth and radiometric dating. So, which I love those topics. I mean, I can do that off the cuff, so no big deal. But yeah, so that's the first hour. The second hour, for anybody who was tuned in last week, and I hope you were, because we had a great discussion. David and I had a great time last week. Towards the end of the show, we brought out a little bit about David and his background and his belief that he is now a secular, humanist, atheistic Jew. And he says that his really...
Wait, stop.
Yeah.
Jewish. You wouldn't use the N-word. Would you?
That's a swear word.
Yeah.
Saying Jew is a swear word.
It is to those that grew up after the Holocaust, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I don't think Italian is like a swear word. If somebody calls me an Italian, I mean, I think that's great. But okay, whatever. So, atheistic Jewish person. That just doesn't sound right when you say that. Okay. Anyways, he says that through his knowledge of textual criticism, that he came to the conclusion that Christ couldn't be God based on the Old Testament. So the second hour is going to be you and David discussing textual criticism, because you might know a little bit about textual criticism, a little bit,
maybe a tad.
Yeah.
So let's let folks know, for anyone that's in the Orlando area, we're going to be, Anthony and I are headed down not too far from now, next month, December 19th. Yep. We're going to be at Bethula Baptist Church. That's technically
Beulah Baptist Church.
Sorry, Beulah Baptist Church. It's actually in Winter Garden, Florida, but that's in the Orlando area. We're going to be talking on social justice. We're going to be doing a seminar on Saturday. So if you're in that area, come check that out. If you travel down for that area, stay over. Sunday, Anthony and I will be doing Sunday school and then preaching, so we'll still be there. So if you're in that area, I will be preaching the week before up in Jacksonville, Florida. So if you're if with Pastor Andrew Smith. That I'm looking forward to that. So I'll be preaching there that week, and I think we're planning. What would it be? The trying to think which day, but we're going to go off Friday. I think we're planning
Friday night. We're going to do evangelism. Yeah. So for anybody who saw those pictures of me witnessing to the guy in a Bugatti, which turned out to be a kit Bugatti, but whatever. I'm still calling it a Bugatti. That happened on International Drive in Orlando. It was a great place to witness. And so we're going to go back there on Friday night for several hours. And then we've got the 4-hour conference on Saturday on social justice. And then, preaching on Sunday. So it's going to be a good weekend.
It should be. It should be. So, all right, let's bring David in. David, welcome again to Apologetics Live. Nice to have you here.
Well, thank you guys so much. It's good to be back for the second week in a row. I really enjoyed last week's discussion, and I hope this one could be as fruitful and cordial as last one.
Yeah, no, me too. Now, David, I don't know if you got the memo, but you are now a secular, humanist, atheistic Jewish person because you can't say Jew anymore.
Well, not if you don't want to offend people.
I'm saying.
Guys, I hope you guys are aware that cultural Judaism is a thing. You guys know that, right?
Oh yeah,
yeah, I know. I'm just teasing Andrew some more.
Yeah, I could tease him that he doesn't have any hair. He could tease me about. Well, he tries. All right, so here's what we wanted to do. We wanted to, David, you had some slides you wanted to go through as an opening.
We were talking about evolution last week, and this ties in nicely with the theme last week, which is the age of the earth and the age of the universe, and some of the radiometric dating. But first, I do have a very important concession that I would like to make to Dr. Anthony. Last week, I said on the show that the Bible and science are not contradictory at all, and that both could be true at the same time. However, after listening back to last week's debate and really researching it more, I came to the conclusion that they are absolutely 100% in conflict, that a confirmation of one necessarily disconfirms the other.
You're talking about age of the earth, right?
To the earth, evolution, and all that. Would you agree with that?
No, I do. And I think it's wonderful. I wish my Christian brethren who try to jam millions to billions of years into the Bible or evolution of the Bible would get those screws back and put them back in their head, because they have, and I'm trying to be nice, but it's downright ridiculous. So I appreciate that you understand that they're in total conflict.
Yeah, and if you can't trust what it says in the beginning, if you can't trust what it says when testable issues, you can't really trust what it says when issues that are not testable. And my friend Standing for Truth says it quite well. If you can't, if you deny the first Adam, you have to deny the second Adam, because Jesus Christ in the New Testament is considered to be the second Adam. So if there's no first Adam, there's no second Adam.
You know what? You could probably teach this course better.
There you go.
You just got more theology than probably 85% of Christians across the country.
Yeah. That's actually, Anthony talks about an event when he was working on his book, and had that exact discussion with a pastor who didn't think there's a big deal about you can have millions of years in the Bible.
Yeah.
So. And here's the thing: you got to do some serious scripture twisting in order to try and deny the veracity of the Noah's Ark and all of that, and affirm the New Testament, because the New Testament says, I think as Paul or Peter, that uses the analogy of Noah's Ark saving him and all of that, and so
we see it in 2 Peter and in Matthew.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah,
right.
No, you're right. So,
hey, Anthony, you're getting a hello from Ohio. I guess this is a fellow Ohioan that's going to have to make sure that they're, locked away after 10 o'clock.
So, Cynthia, I don't know about you, but I'm going outside at 10 o'clock and I'm going to walk down the street. As soon as this is over, I'm outside.
All right. So let me put up David's slides here.
Yep.
And I'm gonna go into the background so that it's so that you guys can have a good discussion, just the two of you, and may pop in every once in a while with questions, but
Awesome.
so go for it.
Sure. So as we already mentioned, today's topic is going to be on the age of the Earth. So there are 4 critical questions. I'm actually going to add a 4th critical question to the 3 critical questions that they asked. How do we know that it is true? Has it ever been observed? Are there any assumptions? And if there are any assumptions, how warranted are those assumptions? These are what I consider to be the 4 critical questions. First, let's consider distant starlight. The speed of light is 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, and it takes about 8 minutes for the light from the sun to reach Earth. Thus, we are looking at the sun as it was 8 minutes ago. This is actually XGN C11, a galaxy which is measured to be about 13.98 billion light years away. Thus, the light from this galaxy had to be traveling for more than 13 billion years, otherwise we could not see it. Here is actually a type 1a supernova that is represented 1.914, and this supernova is 10 billion light years away. So when we're looking back at time, and this supernova that occurred 10 billion years ago. Next, let's get into radiometric dating. Radiometric dating is a method to calculate the age of a sample by measuring the presence of radioactive decay. Certain isotopes are unstable and they will undergo decay. The starting element is called the parent isotope, and the ending isotope is called the daughter isotope. In the scientific literature, a proper radiometric dating will read years before present plus or minus the range divided by 2 at times the standard deviation rate. In other words, as with everything, there is always a margin of error. So let's get into carbon-14 dating, the most well-known of the dating. And I just wanted to point out that carbon-14 dating is not the method that we use to say that the Earth and the universe is around 13 billion years or so. That is actually a different method. Carbon-14 is only good for samples about 50,000 years old. Carbon has 3 main isotopes: carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14. Carbon-14 is unstable and it undergoes beta decay, and it will turn into nitrogen-14. What happens is cosmic radiation from the sun enters the Earth's atmosphere and collides with an atom, creating an energetic neutron. And when that neutron collides with a nitrogen atom, a nitrogen-14 atom turns into a carbon-14 atom. Plants absorb this carbon dioxide and incorporate carbon-14 through photosynthesis. Animals and people eat plants and take in the carbon-14. And following the death, burial, and all of that, they are no longer taking in carbon-14. So this carbon-14 is going to decay back into nitrogen-14. So carbon dating is used on organic samples. It has a half-life of 57-30 years, and it's accurate up to about 50,000 years, as I already mentioned. And it can be calibrated using dendrochromography, I-score samplings, etc. So here we have the Shroud of Turin. 3 independent scientists carbon dated the Shroud to the Middle Ages. And this is actually consistent with what we know about its history. And the Shroud first appeared in 1349, so the carbon dating correlates quite well with what we know about its history. So this is an independent check on it. Here we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is carbon dated to 408 BCE to 318 CE, which is quite consistent with what we know about the history of this Qumran community. And there are over 900 different manuscripts which all date to the same age range. The oldest ones date back well before the time of Christ, and the most recent ones date a couple centuries after Jesus Christ. And so what's nice about carbon dating is that we can use this to check the authenticity of a archaeological find. We can disconfirm the Shroud of Turin, but we can confirm the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this date is universally accepted by even the most ardent young Earth creationists. So here's some more archaeology. This paper is from this past year. Carbon dated several pottery fragments by analyzing the fatty acids left behind on the pottery. And several of these pottery pieces dated back 3600 BCE, plus or minus 200 years. So yeah, that is quite fascinating. And some of these actually date back to over 8,000 years. So much older than Dr. Anthony's universe. Next, let's get into rubidium strontium dating. This is a method technique used to determine the age of rocks and minerals from the quantities they contain isotopes of rubidium-87 and strontium-87 and strontium-86. This has a half-life of 49.23 billion years old. It is an isochron dating. So what we're doing is we're actually measuring two ratios. We're measuring the ratio of rubidium-87 to strontium-86 and strontium-87 to strontium-86. And here we measure this with a mass spectrometry. We can actually tell if a system is open or contaminated, or if it's a closed system, which is pure, simply by looking at the graph.
True.
And this is done, the two ratios should be changing at the same rate. And of course, it's a pretty simple calculation from there. So how do we check its accuracy? Well, we can use multiple dating methods, and we can send samples to independent labs. And so here's a great example, the KT tektites. As you can see, there's a whole list of them and the different methods that was used on it, and they all agree with each other. Dinosaurs went extinct about 70 million years ago after a large asteroid impacted Earth. The multiple tektites were dated from across the world, different methods yielding similar results. And it also correlates quite well with the dates for the dinofossils and other samples within this KT boundary. So in summary, the truth is what the facts are, and the facts are what the evidence shows. Over 40 different dating methods all agree with each other. Each of these dating methods have their own unique half-life methods, calculations, assumptions, etc. We know that it is true because we can observe and measure it. Can Dr. Anthony Silvestro provide robust methods that all agree with each other? Can he do that to show that the Earth and the universe is only 6,000 years old? I suspect that he cannot, and I suspect that the majority of his opening argument will be cherry-picking data for when radiometric dating yielded poor results. So that is what I predict. So let's see if I am correct. Thank you very much. How did I do with time?
I don't know. You were on 7-ish minutes. I mean, I'm not taking exact time, but it's about 7 minutes. So I'll take about that or whatever. Okay. So I'm wondering if we might be doing this for 2 hours tonight rather than we'll have to see how the day goes. Okay. So thank you for being on, David, again. You know, I was excited to have you on last week. I'm excited to have you on again this week. I'm going to start off the exact same way I started last week. I don't debate for the fun of debates. I mean, I enjoy debating, don't get me wrong, but my primary purpose is that I want to see you get saved, and you brought a buddy. I want to see him get saved too. That's the reality. And you know, you guys both suffer from the same thing that I used to suffer from, that every Christian used to suffer from, which is we love our sin, we suppress the truth about God in our sin, and therefore we pretend he doesn't exist so that we can continue doing what we want to do in our lives. And the thing I'm going to tell you again, David, is that, you know, I know your background. We talked about this last week. I'm sorry for all that stuff, but here's the reality is that it doesn't matter what happened in this life. It doesn't matter who treated you wrong or whatever. You're still going to face God on Judgment Day. And when you die, you're going to face him. You're going to have to give an accounting for every sin. Every time you've broken his law, you're going to have to give an accounting for that. And you and I and everybody else deserves just punishment for our sins against him. That's the bottom line. And it's either you're going to pay that penalty for your sin yourself in hell for eternity, or through repentance and faith that was already paid for by Christ on the cross through his death, burial, and resurrection. And so I pray that you come to a saving faith and are granted repentance and knowledge about who he is, and then granted faith according to who he is. Having said all that, where I'm going to go for my remaining time in this informal opening is last week was interesting. We talked about evolution, and as we talked about, and you correctly stated that the reality is scientists know that there's zero observable evidence of macroevolution. There is zero observable evidence going from the single cell all the way up to all the complex life we see today. There's none. There is no observable evidence of this. Microevolution and the idea of speciation is not evidence for macroevolution. That's that's doing a logical fallacy there, equivocating on the term evolution. And so one of the things I like to point out anyway to the biologists, say, well, how convenient. Y'all like to start with the single simple cell. The reality is you don't even want to touch the fact that it's impossible for even one cell to magically come together with all the micro machines and the millions of pieces that are specifically designed to come together for that cell in order to be able to live, breathe, eat, excrete waste, heal, and reproduce in order for that to be able to evolve in the first place. Like, that is literally impossible. So scientists just ignore it. And that's okay, fine, I get it. We're going to now talk today. And I love these topics, by the way. I mean, I did write a book on this about 4 years ago on the origin of kinds, and I address all these topics in the book that we're going to talk about today too. So biologists, on one hand, they don't want to deal with the first cell coming around. Then we talk to the physicists and astrophysicists, and they like to say, well, here's the matter, here's how stars form, here's how this happens, and blah, 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 blah. Really? Tell me where the matter came from to begin with. Tell me how life started out of non-life to begin with, because those two things go against all known laws of science. You can't get something from nothing, and you can't get life from not life. Like these are well-documented, well-known issues. And so the astrophysicists and physicists cheat the same way the biologists do, and they just kind of ignore the beginnings. And they say, well, we have these stars, and now let's talk about the distant starlight problem, and oh, we got you now, you creationists. No, actually, you don't. We do have lots and lots of truth, and this is what we have to understand about science. There's two types of science. When we understand science, there's a historical version of science, and there's an operational or experimental type of science. I addressed this slightly last week. When we're talking about observing something today in real time, a real observation, so not observing microevolution and then pretending that's macroevolution and testing it. We're talking about observing something real. So you observe something, it's real. We now come up with a hypothesis about what we saw. So we now do tests, we repeat those tests, and we hopefully verify our hypothesis we came off of from our observation. And now we can call something a theory as time goes on. That's how the experimental science world works. It has to be real-time observations, real-time testing, real-time results for us to come up with theories. That's one side. The other side of science is nobody observed it. We have no clue how it happened. We're going to try to use today's clues and try to go backwards and figure out what happened back then when there was no eyewitnesses. So it's the difference between it's the difference between me dropping an apple and watching it hit the ground a bunch of times, and that's a test that I can try to test a hypothesis of my observation. There must be some force that's causing this apple to fall to the ground each and every time I release it. And so when I do that a bunch of times, I can say, wait a minute, maybe there's a force, right? Hypothesis, maybe there's a force. I'm going to keep testing this. Wow, you know what? This works each and every time. And now I think this is a theory. Okay, cool. That's different than the person whose dead body was found in the bottom of a lake. And the decay has happened for days, weeks, months, and this body gets found and dragged out of the water. And now you've got detectives going around and trying to find clues in real time and trying to put those things together in real time based on something that happened in the past with no eyewitnesses. That's historical science. So you can apply some experimental science in real time, but you can't apply it to history. It's a category error. And that is a real issue in terms of trying to prove things from the past with experimental science. So we want to make sure we keep those two things separated here. Now, having said that, I'm going to address just, I think, one thing, and then my time will probably be up here. David, your first talking slide, so your second slide said the 4 critical questions. How do we know it's true? Has it ever been observed? Are there any assumptions? And then you added the addendum. If so, how warranted are the assumptions? It's a decent addendum. This is the reason why we ask these questions, is because it's historical science. How do we know it's true? Well, we don't, because there's no eyewitness, from a scientific perspective. Now, as Christians, we understand there is an eyewitness. It was God. But okay, so how do we know it's true? We don't. Has it ever been observed? No. That goes to the origins of the universe, as well as the origin of the first cell, as well as macroevolution. And then are there any assumptions? Oh, you betcha. There are tons and tons and tons and tons of assumptions. Now, can some of them be warranted based on today's observations? Sure. We have some assumptions that could theoretically be better than other assumptions. It doesn't make them any less true or any more true. It just means they're still assumptions. So that's an important thing for us to understand going forward. And again, we're going to talk through this, David. You're going to walk away when we're done and recognize that just like last week, the secular scientists have literally no leg to stand on in the science. Last week in supporting macroevolution, this week in supporting origin of the universe, as well as distant starlight and carbon-14 dating. And so on that, I think we should start opening up to distant starlight, right? And it's kind of our first topic.
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about distant starlight. So how would you address that? Because we have these lights that had to be traveling. Let's just take the nearest star system, which is Alpha Centauri, about 3 light years away.
Yeah.
That light had 2 days to get from Alpha Centauri to Earth in order for Adam to be able to see it. So if this is the case, then that means that the light had to be traveling millions of times faster than it is today. Mm-hmm. Problem with that, there's a lot of problems. Do you subscribe to the CDK model that light slow down over time? By any chance, how would you address this issue?
Yeah, great question. Well, before we wonder about how I address the issue, because this is the way I address the issue, is are there any assumptions in the statement you just made? So you said factually that it takes X amount of time for light to come to Earth from Alpha Centauri. Now, just to give you some credit and understanding, just for people to understand, because this is an apologetic show. The way we see things is not because our eyes magically go out and see things, right? Our eyes see things because light is bouncing around everywhere, and the light that's bouncing off of objects is bouncing into our eyes, and that's what we're capturing in our eyes, right? So the issue with the distant starlight, according to secular scientists, is that light, if we can see the star, that means that light is entering our eyes, and that means because this light is 13 billion light years away, it must have taken 13 billion years for that light to travel all the way through the universe to get into our eyes for us to see it. Therefore, the universe must be 13 plus billion years old at a minimum. That's the argument. Now, here's my question for you, David.
Oh, sure. Yep.
Are there any assumptions?
Well, I guess you can say there's an assumption that the light speed has been constant over time, but that's a pretty easy assumption to prove. First of all, okay, sure. Let's take it one by one. What is the most famous equation in all of science?
E equals mc squared. And
what is E? You know what E is? What is E?
Energy.
What is M?
M is constant, is mass. And
okay,
then
what is C? What is and C squared? Good. So what happens if we were to speed up? Because what you need to make your model work is for us to speed up light at least 1 million times faster than it was now.
Actually, I haven't told you what my model is yet.
Okay, sure. So what exactly is your model?
Here's the problem is that the assumption that scientists are making is completely wrong.
Okay, so what assumption are we making, and why is that assumption wrong?
Is that the speed of light? You don't know if that's actually the speed of light. The speed of light is the average speed of light. All that's ever quoted is the average speed of light. And you know the problem that has been plaguing physicists for 100 years now is that they don't know, and it's impossible to calculate the one-way speed of light. And that all the equations in the physics world, Jason Lau just wrote a book on this, all the equations of the physics world work out whether you have the one-way speed of light instantaneous and the return speed of light taking double the time of what the average speed of light is, or anything in between. That's a major assumption that is made by secular scientists. I don't pretend to know the answer just as much as the secular scientists don't either.
All right, sure. So Leo wants to come in because he has all this physics knowledge, and he says he wants to correct you on this.
Well, that's fine, but there is no one-way speed of light that's ever been.
Yes, there is.
Give me
So
just a second. I gotta grab a table to set my laptop. You know what? Here, let me just do this for the time being. So, number one, the speed of light is a constant. We know that it's a constant. We've done experiments showing
speed
that
of light. That's the problem.
Speed of light is not an average. No, it's not.
okay. Also, I also want to point out that I also want to point out real quick that the speed of light is actually tied to several other physical constants, such as the vacuum.
If the speed of light wasn't constant, pretty much the whole of modern physics would be wrong.
Okay, Leo. So I want folks watching to notice what's happening, because when we talk on the show about a bait and switch that happens, or in this case, equivocation, fallacy of equivocation, this is what folks you're seeing here. Anthony was very clear in this. The one-way speed of light versus what they're talking about, a round trip speed of light. Now, what they're going to do is talk about constant, and you start giggling and laughing, which is a way of kind of brushing off things. But that actually shows an arrogance and a lack of being willing to hear someone out. And that's why you're seeing him fall into the fallacy, because he's arguing something and you're seeing it. He's going to say, well, we have all these constants. We do. And everything that he was giving with constants, guess what? Meaningless. Because it has nothing to do with the topic.
Well, but the
issue that Leo, if he wants to, has to prove is how fast, when you shoot a beam of light to a mirror that's on Mars or on the moon and it returns, that's the round trip. What's the speed going to the moon and what's the speed returning from the moon? That's impossible to measure.
It would be about 299,792 kilometers per second.
You're giving, light can only be measured, because of time dilation, can only be measured back and forth. It's a round trip. So all the equations where the constant speed of light is tied to, it's the average speed of light.
No, it's not.
I don't have an issue with that.
There's no average. Okay. There's no average there. It's not an average.
Okay, Leo,
ignoring all secular science.
I've talked to the secular scientists.
Let me get Leo to try to define this for us. Okay, Leo, how do we measure this? How do we measure the speed of light?
Measure the speed of light? Well, there's been numerous experiments to measure the speed of light. Most frequently, C is tied to, I believe it's 1 over the square root of the electric permeability of space times the magnetic permittivity of space.
Whatever. Tell us how they measure.
Hold on. So, folks, I just want you to notice that sounds really impressive, and he said absolutely nothing on answering the actual question.
Well, I did answer.
How do we do the experiment?
You just didn't understand what I had said.
No. What's the experiment?
I asked you how you measure it. That means an
How do we
experiment.
measure the speed of light? Well, there's been Michelson and Morley did an experiment where they tried to demonstrate that to see if there was a luminiferous ether, and those experiments were based on measuring the speed of light and variances in it. They couldn't measure variance in the speed of light as the Earth moved, demonstrating that there is no luminiferous ether. So there's one experiment.
No.
I think some of the earliest experiments go back to, what was it, 1626 that Galileo performed the first experiment.
So let me try this now. If Andrew asked me to measure this microphone, I would take out a ruler and I would measure my microphone. Okay. What we're asking you is how do the scientists, every single time they've ever tested the speed of light, how do they test it?
And I actually provided a way of doing it. So when I say how, I provided a way you can do it. You shoot a beam of light on a vacuum.
It's in a vacuum.
And it shoots out, and we can measure how long it takes to get there and back to us. But you cannot measure how long it takes to get there
and then how to measure from there back to us. You're assuming that.
No.
And you're okay, then you tell me how you measure the speed of light.
I gave you one way that we've done it.
No,
already.
you gave me arguments. You didn't explain how you actually do the measurement. See, I give you a way.
I'm not a professional. I
should
don't know
beam
the
right? You
exact
should beam a light
methodology
to a mirror that's on the moon, and you see the light come back from the point that you shoot it, and it comes back is about 3 seconds, right? So we can measure that time. The time is the measurement. So you have to show how you actually measure the speed from the Earth just to the moon.
Well, you would go to the moon and then measure how long it takes from a light beam to go from the Earth to the moon.
And is
Yeah,
it
exactly. It's that simple. Just calculate the one way. How does it? The amount of time it takes to actually get to the moon. That's pretty easy to calculate. And
It's also worth mentioning that the speed of light is not constant, then our GPS systems wouldn't work.
and also
that is a non sequitur.
No, it's not.
Yes, it absolutely is, because none of us are disagreeing with the round trip speed of light. None of us.
The speed doesn't change.
You assume
doesn't change it. The speed of light doesn't change. It doesn't matter if it's round trip or one way
It
or
only
back.
changes in a medium where the photons begin to interact with the electron cloud surrounding whatever particular material makes up that medium.
So the thing that you have to do is you're going to have to start engaging with what Anthony and I are saying.
I have been.
You haven't been, because you haven't been answering the questions.
And by the way, Destiny put it also stated quite nicely that it is also determined by the strength of the electric field strength constant and the magnetic field strength constant, also which is the permittivity and the permissivity constant of free space.
Yeah, that's what I had said earlier. C is equal to 1 over the square root of what is it?
That's
rho naught by epsilon naught. Yeah.
Okay.
And
So
that's by the way the and that's what I was talking about earlier, is that if the speed of light was not the speed of light, you can't take the speed of light down to.
Let me help you. What does C represent? The constant C. What does that mean?
The C represents the constant of the speed of light.
No,
Correct.
it means the average speed of light.
No.
There is no such thing as average speed of
There's
light.
no
That
such
is
thing
not
as
a
an average
term that
speed of light.
exists in modern physics. Nowhere.
Hold on. Because I don't want there being this constant talking over. Okay. So we got to be speaking of the same thing. And you guys are not doing it. So I'm going to try again. Giving a formula for the speed of light is not a description of how you measure it. Now, Leo, you said you can measure one way, the direction from how fast it takes from the Earth to the moon. Okay. Now you're going to have to explain how you have all the gravity exactly the same, no changes in gravity that can affect the time or anything like that. So you need to prove how you can do one direction, not both. Every time you give the calculations go, GPS wouldn't work. The thing you're doing, and what Anthony keeps saying, is you're talking about the average. That's to the moon and back. You are not giving how fast it takes in one direction. So go ahead.
So number one, gravity doesn't change the speed of light. Number two, the speed of light isn't an average. And number three, you would measure from going from the Earth to the moon by going to the moon and measuring how long it takes a photon or a beam of light to go from the Earth to the moon. It's about, I believe, 1.2 per second.
Hold on. I got one thing he said, Anthony.
Yeah, that's fine.
He just said,
Headache.
yeah. And folks, go back and listen. You'll hear that I said that gravity affects not the speed of light, time. Now, unless you want to disagree with Einstein, you can go ahead and disagree with Einstein.
No, light doesn't experience time. Photons are moving at the speed of light. They're permanently
Yes, you have no
time-dilated.
way to measure it without a clock.
Okay. That doesn't mean that we can't measure it.
Affected by gravity, your measurement, you can't prove that measurement. That's the
I'm
point.
curious, what level of physics class have you taken?
On like formally or
Yeah,
just
yeah.
through, well, I've taken, not because I haven't been to college, but I've done several of the great courses that are taught by some of the most renowned physicists. And I've watched probably close to 40 lectures from Leonard Susskind, who's one of the world's most renowned physicists. He's given almost 140 lectures in total, called the theoretical minimum.
Yeah. So let me help you. Okay.
I don't think I need help here.
When you get into college and you take some of these courses like I have, I was in all kinds of upper level as a double major math and chemistry. I took physics courses. I understood. I took an entire semester in Schrodinger equation. Like I get this stuff to a good degree. You've literally been lied to if you've honestly never been told. If you've honestly never been told that light cannot be measured because of time dilation issues. You cannot synchronize two clocks.
Yes, you can.
You can't.
Yes, you can.
Look at any.
Okay. Anthony, prove it then. Where's your proof of this?
We've done it.
And I'm also gonna say one thing, Leo, because I'll just let you know right off the bat. I have an aversion to people that come in and act arrogantly and pretend like they know everything and then say ignorant statements. When you take
done any of that
and you twist it and then you put different words in there, that is a way to get put back into backstage. So you're going to need to correct that and actually start dealing with what Anthony's saying.
I have been.
You have not been, and we
actually. I got to say, I think that
I have been.
Actually, I've got to say, I've sat back for 40 minutes, and man, you jumped on the show and have been as arrogant as can be. And I got to say,
I'm not being arrogant.
No. Listen up. You can leave the show if you want. That's fine. But we're trying to have a polite conversation. What they're trying to teach you, I've actually put it in the back and in the front for everyone to see the arguments that they're trying to make to you, but you're not listening.
I'm listening to them.
Okay.
Their arguments just aren't correct, and the physicists don't support what they're saying.
The physicists actually do, and they're on YouTube that actually talk about it.
No, they really don't.
Listen, Leo, making statements like "no, they don't" doesn't actually prove anything. Okay,
I wasn't trying to prove anything with that statement.
Okay, if you're going to keep talking over, we're just going to be done with you, and it'll just be David. And
please don't misconstrue what I'm saying. Then
you misconstrued what I said, and I proved it. Now you prove where I misconstrued what you said.
Or you keep saying that I'm misconstruing what you guys are saying when I'm not. I'm just correcting you.
You're not correcting because we keep trying to point it out. Okay, well that's it. You're gone. Okay, David, go ahead. You can talk without your help because he's just being arrogant and not actually listening. We've tried.
Let me lay something out for the audience. Yeah, Andrew, let me lay something out for your audience because this is important for people to understand. And we're going to do just really, really simple math here. So if I take the numbers 2 and 20,
Okay.
and I get the average, that would be 11. If I take the numbers 4 and 18, I add them together, get 22, take the average, I get 11. If I take the numbers 6 and 16, I get 22, the average is 11. Now, why am I doing this? Because this is what's been shown with real physicists is that the C is what they call the constant, is the average speed of light. I could have light be directional one way. Let's give it a speed of 2 and the other way a speed of 20. The average is 11. I could give it one way 4, the opposite way 18. Guess what the average is? 11. I give it 6 one way, 16 the other way. Guess what the average is? Still 11. This is so just quoting a bunch of formulas with C in it doesn't prove anything. What is C? And if you go back and read all the science books, it's and unfortunately there's a lot of scientists who and I remember this back in school. It's kind of like in high school when they teach about the atom, they draw these little electron circles around the nucleus, right? And they say this is how the electrons travel. And then you get to college courses and you find out, you know what? That's not how electrons. There's more of like this cloud thing that happens. And then when you get into really upper level chemistry, you're like, it's even worse than that. It's just like this whole big cloud. And we have a real problem in understanding speed and position of each one of those electrons. We just know probability is where the electron's going to sit. Like this is what happens in progression of knowledge. They teach it very simply in the beginning, and then we start to learn more as time goes on. Well, guess what light is? Light is not, we don't understand what the one directional speed of light is. It's always been the average speed of light. Unfortunately, in very low level physics classes, and probably a lot of the class, so I don't even fault Leo. I wish he would have just listened and understood this. But the reality is that in some of the early courses he's taken, the scientists are being sloppy, or they're trying to keep it simple and just throwing out speed of light as c. In reality, it's the average speed of light. And for anybody who wants it, I think Justin has the video. He can post it into the comment section. Jason Lyle said this is the best video that's ever been done on this. It's only about 18 minutes long. It will explain to you the problem with the synchronizing of clocks and why it's impossible. It's not just that it's not been done. It's impossible to get the one-way speed of light calculated. It always has to be because of the problem with two clocks. You can't take the speed of light from here to here and get that one directional speed. Because these clocks can never be synchronized according to physics. So what has to happen is you have to have, in a vacuum, light go from the source, bounce somewhere here, come back to the source. And because it's the same clock, you don't have to worry about synchronizing it with another clock. Now we get the average speed of light. How long did it take to go there and back? We divide it by 2, and now we have an average speed of light. That is the only way that you can actually get the speed of light, and it's from there. And I took quantum mechanics as well, immutable destiny. I don't know where you're coming up with the information from. It's always been known as the average speed of light, and so there's plenty of stuff you guys can find on that to learn about the light. Having said all of that, David, let's get back to our understanding of light. I bring up the assumption because there's an assumption there, and I'm not pretending as creationists that we have all the answers that secular scientists want to think they have in terms of speed of light. I can tell you this, that secular scientists have the exact same problem. I seriously doubt this Anthony guy is taking quantum mechanics. Would you like me to pull out my book on quantum mechanics and even my A+ grade in quantum mechanics?
No, I mean, Anthony, this is the reason he got kicked. I mean, this is the proof of arrogance right there.
Exactly.
Okay? And I'm sorry, David, but this is, this is what you end up dealing with, folks, when you deal with apologetics, with people who have an ignorant arrogance. What is an ignorant arrogance? They don't know what they're talking about, but they're convinced they're right because they've seen some lectures. They don't understand all the background of the lectures, but they've seen the lectures. And the arrogance is they know they're right and you can't question them. They won't listen to anything. They don't take in any information that doesn't confirm their bias. That's a fallacy, by the way, confirmation bias. That's what you have on display. It creates an ignorant arrogance, and that is the reason you end up seeing that. Now, there's the link for you to go to that Justin put out for you to see from an astrophysicist, someone that has a PhD in the subject, explaining this stuff. So when you say no one with a PhD would believe that, well, I guess there is someone that does, and people have been engaging back and forth with his conclusions. So
yeah, there are about 7 million people that have been dealing with that as well on that.
Yeah, no, it's a great video. Okay, so David, I am not going to pretend to give answers. Like, we as creationists, the same way secular scientists, we don't understand light completely. Are you familiar with the horizon problem?
Yes, I am familiar with the horizon problem with the Big Bang model. I am familiar with the issues and the proposed solutions of inflation and grand unified theory. I am familiar with that. Yeah, and so just to explain to our audience what the issue is, because the reality is that secular scientists, secular physicists have the exact same problem they claim the creationists have. They say, well, you have a problem because you can't explain this distant starlight that's coming in that obviously took billions of years. So therefore, you must think that the light travels much faster than the speed of light. Okay. Let's talk about the horizon problem now on the secular model. According to the Big Bang, which obviously is a fallacy, but okay. Maybe I should try and explain it just so we can both be on the same page. Okay. So basically, the horizon problem is the issue of, okay, if this Big Bang happened, why is the universe so homogeneous, correct? Well, the temperature so homogeneous, right? It's within 10 to the negative fifth Kelvin. So it's almost a universal temperature, not when you're close to a star, but it's when you're in the vast, because we look at stars, and if you go to Canada, you see lots and lots of stars.
But in reality, space is the universe is almost all space, right? And so we're talking not next to a star, but we're talking in the vast areas of space that no matter where we test and probe, that it's all within 10 to negative fifth Kelvin, which is really, really small. So it's essentially the same temperature.
Yeah, and I think the inflation model solves it quite well. And it solves the horizon, the flatness, the monopole, and the inflation. I think it does explain it quite well.
Well, let's talk about the problem, though. So, because the problem is that very similar to if you have a hot cup of coffee, and this is the way I explain it to people when I teach. You have a hot cup of coffee. If you put the correct amount of ice cubes in that coffee to make it a temperature that would be okay for you to not burn yourself. Let's say you dump all that ice in, and the moment it's done melting, you take a sip. What would happen to you? Well, if you tried this at home, you would get burned. Why? Some of that, the ice that melted, most of the cold would be still on the top, and most of the heat would still be on the bottom, because it takes time for the heat to transfer. So what you have to do then is you have to take a coffee stirrer and stir the coffee, so that you get that uniform mixing of heat. Well, very similar to why we put coffee, right? If you put coffee creamer in your coffee, it's going to stick on top. Similar analogy, you have to mix it up to get it to mix together properly. Okay, so this is a heat issue. If you had that cup of coffee and you didn't actually stir it, it takes a little while for the heat to transfer and to get a uniform cup of temperature that's not going to burn you. Well, the universe is the same way. If we have the only way that the universe, which would have had to have hot and cold spots in the Big Bang model, but yet we see a temperate, we see a pretty the temperature pretty much the same everywhere. That means you have to have lots of light traveling, carrying energy, causing all the different hot and cold spots to become a uniform temperature throughout the universe. And the issue is that if you take in 13 and a half to 14 billion years of a universe existing, there's not been anywhere near enough time for the universe to have a uniform temperature, right? That's the horizon problem. So secular scientists know this is the problem. They've always known that their Big Bang model doesn't work because they have to believe the speed of light is faster than the average speed of light is faster than the average speed of light for it to work. And this is why they come up with all these different inflationary theories. This is why they looked at the Higgs boson particle a few years ago, got really excited because it could have changed the face of their calculations for the Big Bang to try to help solve the horizon problem, amongst others. So that's the issue. So now, David, I know you're excited because you feel like scientists at least have some attempted explanations for this, right?
Yeah. So kind of wanted to kind of take back and I think we should just go back real quick to the original issue of the speed of light. When you actually agree, and I do apologize for what happened earlier.
That's okay. It's fine.
So the question that I have for you, what exactly is your model to explain, even if I were to concede your point that we don't know the speed of light in a one-way direction, how exactly would you explain how we have light from billions of light years away, and we can see quite detailed with the supernovae and the gravitational waves from billions of miles that perfectly concords with relativity and all of that. So can you kind of help me explain, according to your model, how do you propose, what is your proposed solution?
Yeah, God made it.
Okay, so basically magic, but unfortunately, that's not a valid answer in science.
Well, actually, it's not magic. It's that the creator of the universe, who made that initial cell that the biologists can't explain, who made all the matter in the beginning and made everything that we see today, he's quite powerful enough to be able to make the universe to be the exact way it is. Now, do we have theories as creationists? Of course. We see that God has stretched out the heavens. It could very well be that the light that was present from the stars early in creation, and then he expanded the universe, is why we still have light that's coming in from the stars. It's an entire possibility. Another possibility is this issue of light. If light is obviously, again, we go back to the fact light is an average speed of light. So if light travels one way in say instantaneously and the other way in twice the time than the average speed of light is today, then the average speed of light would still be the same average, right? So that's what my point was before, 2 and 20. If light would travel, say, 20 miles an hour one way and 2 miles an hour back, the average is 11. If it traveled 18 miles an hour one way and 4 miles an hour back, the average is still 11. If it traveled 21.999999 miles an hour one way and then 0.000001 the other way, guess what? It would still average 11 miles an hour. So that's an easy way to explain it. As Andrew was talking before, there could be the idea of gravitational wells. This is a little bit more advanced, but the way that light can travel is different in places of heavy gravity versus not, especially from our perspective. So there's a number of explanations that we have to be able to say, hey, there's some possibilities. In the end, it doesn't make or break everything, because I'm going to go back to the main issue here that I really opened with. It's great to talk about light. I love it. It's great to talk about planets and stars. Awesome. But the question is where did it all come from to begin with?
Okay, so let's talk about one by one. Go back to the Higgs boson. This is why I love science, is that the Higgs boson particle, for those who don't know, was actually predicted in the 1960s through mathematical equations, and it wasn't experimentally confirmed until 2012, I think.
It was 20 years ago that they tried to claim they found a bit of Higgs boson particle. Yeah.
Do you think they actually found it?
No. I mean, and even if they did, it wouldn't have mattered anyway.
Actually, just note, because like basically, if you look, every time that their funding comes up, they claim they found it. This has been going. I've been following this for decades now. They always say they're very close, just as the funding comes up. So, but they've said that before.
I actually, it was literally discovered by Atlas and CMS and the ZERN. So this has definitely been found, and we know it exists through the mathematical equations. So
okay, but see, that's the problem. So they have mathematical modeling to try to. So okay, secular scientists that know that there's catastrophic problems, the Big Bang Theory, have come up with an idea mathematically that, hey, here's a way we can fudge the numbers Biden's way. I mean, Higgs boson particle way by doing this, and this mathematically in order. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. But they look at the math because, okay, I was a math guy. I know how to fudge the numbers. All you have to do is say, well, if we put another thing here, now we get this expectation. Well, now all of a sudden this horizon problem doesn't seem to be as big of a problem anymore. That's what they did mathematically. Mathematics didn't prove it. All mathematics does is give them a way out. And so if you say it's actually a logical fallacy to say that too. You're starting with a statement that you're attempting to prove, but you're giving that proof within your statement. So that's exactly what they've done and what they always do when they try to come up with the rescuing devices.
Okay, sure. So yeah, we definitely know the Higgs boson particle exists. We literally discovered it with the Large Hadron Collider. It's simply not something that is really up for debate in the physics community. The question that I have for you is, what would that do if we had a Higgs boson particle? What would that do to your model? Anything? What would that do for your model if you accepted that?
I don't care if they find a Higgs boson particle or not. It doesn't disprove God. God still made it. And I will say this. I mean, whoever this Heisenberg is, we don't have secular science. We just have science. I agree with you. The reason why I say secular science is when scientists lie in order to suppress the truth about God and try to pretend God doesn't exist, I call that secular science. Everything else, you're right. Science is science. As long as we distinguish between historical science and experimental science, that is science. And the problem with science is that if we do science properly and we do it without bias, and we actually do this with proper testing and proper everything, that's where we actually make scientific discoveries in this world. This is where we actually learn things. When secular scientists are doing what you just did there, or what you told us, the audience there, about Higgs boson particle, where they say, well, we know we have a catastrophic problem in the Big Bang. How are we going to solve this? Oh, let's put a fudge factor in here and we'll call this a Higgs boson particle. That's not science. That's fairy tale. That's guesswork.
Yeah, the Higgs boson particle that was discovered literally conformed to the mathematical predictions made in the 1960s. So it conformed perfectly to what we would have predicted in the 1960s.
If I could real quick, I posted on here in the private chat that there actually was in Tech Times News, they actually have a discussion about the Higgs boson particle coming from CERN, the super collider. And it talks about the fact that there are many physicists that say that it is definitely not what they were trying to say it was. Anthony's research discussion here is confirmed by many different physicists that say this is it's basically a straw man, and that's just I want to make sure that's in there. If you guys want the article, I can post it.
Yeah. So okay, let's go to some more fun topics here. You know, all right. Because I mean, we kind of went through some of these already. I think we talked enough about this in Starlight.
So instead of bored. Yeah, we spoke about that for a while. So I guess should kind of just move on to radiometric dating, carbon dating, if you want.
Yeah, we can do that. So I'm pulling your slides up here for me to view as well. Okay, so you did a nice job in explaining very simply what radiometric dating is that we take a rock. Now I'm going to ask you this question: what are our assumptions? But so we're going to take a rock and we're going to look at the parent and daughter atoms, and based on the ratio of parent and daughter atoms, we are going to say it's X amount years old, because we know what the decay rate is from parent to daughter. Right.
Correct. We do know the decay rate has been pretty well established. And in fact, would you agree kind of with the accelerated nuclear decay model by any chance? Would you at least agree that there's billions of years worth of radiometric decay?
Well, it depends how we're defining this, because if we're defining it in a way to say that this Earth is billions of years old, then no. Because again, we have to look at assumptions. So as far as we can tell, so you pulled up, I think rubidium strontium is one of them that you pulled up, right? Uranium lead is probably the most common one that's used.
Uranium lead is probably the most accurate. And one of the things I want to ask you is, if they were all wrong or invalid assumptions or whatever, why is it that they all agree quite well with each other? They all have their unique assumptions. They all have their unique half-lives. And when we actually correlate them, this is why scientists use different methods. Mm-hmm. That way they can cross-check it, and they can. And the beautiful thing about isochrone dating is that you can actually tell if the sample is closed or if it's contaminated.
Yeah, and that they say that, and it helps to skew the numbers a little bit towards what they're trying to say, and I don't have an issue with that. I'm going to say, what are some of the major assumptions? So when we test a rock today, we see parent and daughter atoms. What is an assumption of that rock when that rock first formed?
Well, one of the assumptions is that the decay rate has always been constant.
Okay, good. So for billions of years, according to secular scientists, have there been people around to always test the decay rate to see if it's always been?
Okay, sure. So let's talk about that real quick. I guess the second question is, how warranted is the assumption? That's the next question we have to ask. And as it turns out, if you want to accelerate nuclear decay, that nuclear decay actually produces significantly in radiation. And Dr. Andrew Snelling, who is a geologist on the Answers to Genesis and ICR payroll, when he developed the, because Andrew Snelling agrees that there is billions of worth that when we actually do these dating methods, Dr. Snelling would agree, and I know Standing for Truth also agrees that they actually do appear to be billions of years old. And what Dr. Andrew Snelling did is he actually calculated what the temperature would be if you try and speed up nuclear decay to billions of years worth in only a couple of thousand years. He got the number 22,000 degrees Kelvin. So this is what this is the problem if you want to accelerate nuclear decay. And also, if I would to add on to that, nuclear decay happens because the atom is unstable. The neutron, I think, is too large. The nucleus of the atom is too large, and so it emits radiation. So I'll explain it like this: radioactive decay is having an unstable atom go into a more stable situation. That is what it is.
Right.
So, so if you want to, it is all governed by the electroweak force. So if you're wanting to change the, if you want to speed up the decay rate, you're going to have to change one of the four fundamental forces of nature. And so you definitely need to create a model. How exactly is the speed, how exactly does the nuclear decay speed up billions of times faster than it is now?
Yeah.
And how do you account for the heat problem that Dr. Snelling agrees with?
Yeah, well, yeah. But you're only telling us part of what Dr. Snelling says. So when he qualifies the statement about billions of years of decay, so to speak, seen, he's not saying that Earth is billions of years old. What he's saying is that in laboratories today, we can affect this. We can affect the decay rate.
Yeah.
We can. They've shown that can be done. Now, having said that, where Andrew Snelling has done a ton of research, and I'm not going to get into all this. People can go look up these articles. Look up polonium radio halos and the escape rates of helium. And what you're going to find is that the reason why he says that you saw a change in the rate of decay, it's sped up many, many, many times, was because during a catastrophic time like the flood, when the Earth changed tremendously in that time period, we have evidence of an extreme change in decay rates in terms of how the decay occurred. And it has to do with these polonium radio halos. I wouldn't do anybody any service today trying to explain it all. It's better to go read the article and see why he came to that conclusion. Having said all that, what I was trying to get to, yes, that's one assumption. That's a problem. There is no way to verify that the decay rate has always been the same for billions of years, according to secular scientists. But let's go to a second problem. How do you know that the rock to begin with only started with only parent atoms and no daughter atoms?
Well, that's actually a very good question. One way we can do that is, again, through the isotopy dating, and several of the atoms are what is it called? Incompatible. I know rubidium is incompatible, and let me just pull up my notes real quick.
No, they say that, but the reality is that's a major assumption that is one improvable, and two, we have actual data today of. So okay, let's back up for a moment. What rocks are the only rocks that can be tested radiometric dating wise?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get your question.
What's the only type of rock that we can actually test?
I believe igneous rocks.
Yeah, it has to be lava flow, right? And so lava flow, it can't be anything sedimentary. No sedimentary rocks can be tested. Why? Because sedimentary rock is just a conglomeration of lots of rocks that are glued together by some massive, flood event that would have occurred about 4,300 years ago. But so when it comes to igneous rock, okay, we got igneous rock, which means that there have actually been volcanic explosions that we've seen. Mount Etna in Italy, we've seen Mount St. Helen, we've seen a number of them. And every one of those rocks that we have on camera literally forming from the lava flow that cools, they've tested those rocks. And those rocks all date into the millions of years when we saw that they had formed between 30 and 60 years ago. It shows the catastrophic problems with assumptions in radiometric dating methods.
All right, sure. So if I can respond to that real quick.
Yeah.
One thing that was noted is that actually Mount Vesuvius, which we know erupted in 69, I think 70, was actually dated using argon-argon dating, and it was dated to within a few months or a few years of the actual date. So are you familiar with that study?
Yeah, I've not seen that study, but one of the problems with radiometric dating is that, especially with carbon, is you have labs that will confirm the dates you want them to confirm. So people who do this for a living, and I know a number of them that do, when you take rocks or bones and you go get them radiometric tested, you have to fill out a form that says what you believe these rocks to be.
Can you actually cite that? Can you actually give me an example of that? Like, can you show me where it does that? Ron.
Yeah, I could pull those up online pretty quickly. So if you want those, I will send those to you. Because equally problematic would be what's happened to creation scientists as a result of this. There is the famous time, it was either University of Arizona or it was one of the universities in Arizona, if it wasn't that one. There were some dinosaur bones that were brought into the laboratory by a creationist.
Oh yeah, Ken Miller, correct? Miller.
I can't remember who it was. They lied about what the bones were. They didn't say what dinosaurs, right?
And can I just say real quick?
Yeah.
If creationists have to resort to lying, what does that say about them? I'm familiar with the thing that you were talking about, so I'm familiar with that quite well. And this is due to the shellac. What they were actually dating was the shellac. It was polluted with that. It was contaminated with that. So what they were actually doing was dating that shellac. And so again,
now, which dating are you talking about?
Hold on, because I do want to say something with what he just said. You're saying when Christians have to resort to lying. What in that case? What happened? He was lying, and
so you admit he was lying.
He was lying to prove that the secular scientists are lying.
No,
he didn't. Yeah, because they come up with the number that he said. Okay, and so the thing is, you want to be careful with some of that. Now, and while I'm on, I'm going to make a quick comment to the guy on Twitter who's responding. For some reason, Twitter thinks me asking the question, "Where do you get morality from?" is spam. So I haven't been responding to him because Twitter thinks that every response I give is spam. So sorry about that, dude. You're just gonna have to come in one of these times and we could talk about morality. I don't know if you guys want to wrap up. We get into textual criticism or.
Sure. So before we get into that, I'm going to finish responding to this issue of creationist dishonesty. Again, what they were doing, it was contaminated with the shellac. So they were dating the shellac and not the actual dinosaur. Finally,
that's the problem of the lab. Why wouldn't they take the bone and date the bone and instead of using the excuse? That was a handy cover up afterwards.
No, it was the problem is. By the way, just out of curiosity, do you remember what the actual age is?
Let's call it what it is, right? Oh, it's contaminated. They always say it's contaminated when they need to. Everything's contaminated.
It was contaminated with the whole thing. It was contaminated. By the way, can I just read real quick from Dr. Andrew Stelling?
Sure.
Here's what he says. And this goes back to the plutonium thing. As has already been shown in Appendix 5-A-5, the existence of plutonium halos in these granite rocks, especially plutonium-218 and plutonium-214 radiohalos, because of the extremely short half-lives of these isotopes, has a direct implication as to the timescale for cooling of these granite plutons. The survival of the plutonium isotopes and the formation of these plutonium halos places a severe timescale limit of 6 to 10 days on the cooling of the granitic pluton from 400 degrees Celsius or more down to the ambient temperatures at the near surface crust level at which these plutons have been placed. This results in the problem of removing the enormous quantity of heat involved from the huge volume, specifically to the order of 200 to 500 kilometers cubed of each granite pluton within 6 to 10 days. And I emphasize removal. Such removal requires heat dispensation at least 6 orders of magnitude greater than currently postulated by conventional wisdom. However, the existence of the plutonium and uranium-238 halos together, if generated concurrently, implies nuclear decay had to have been accelerated, but of course it doesn't. So to put this heat problem into perspective, we can do a rough estimate of the effects of just the accelerated nuclear decay, say 500 million years worth at today's rate, but instead taking place in a single year, the flood year. The following values of the relevant parameters were obtained from Stacey 1992. The typical heat production weights in a granitic pluton for the radioactive decay of uranium, thorium, and potassium is about 10 to the negative 9th watts per kilogram. The specific heat of granite is about 700 joules kilogram, and the number of seconds in 500 million years is 1.6 times 10 to the 16 seconds. Thus, the ambient temperature rise using this formula, again, this is Dr. Andrew Snelling's math, he states about 22,400 degrees Kelvin, which is equivalent to a temperature rise of more than 22,000 degrees Celsius, which is sufficient, of course, to vaporize a granite pluton many times over. And this is, of course, about 3 times hotter than the surface of the sun. So what Dr. Snelling and the RATE project are postulating simply is impossible physically. Just the heat problem is just far too much to overcome.
So let me. So this is a great demonstration of the difference between a truthful scientist, a creation scientist, versus the lying scientists of the secular world. Andrew Snelling says, "Look, here we see evidence of decay rate being sped up. According to my math, the temperatures must be really high. I'm not sure how this occurred." Because it was in the past, I'm not sure. And so all we have is the clues of today. But what we do know is that the decay rate absolutely was accelerated based on the polonium radio halos. So that's what he's saying. I'm giving people a very dumbed down versions, but he's saying, look, I get it. I don't understand this. And guess why? Because I wasn't there 4,300 years ago to do any measurements to see what was going on. He's being honest when he's saying that, unlike secular scientists who are putting fudge factors and just making things up as they go along. I mean, this is the battle we have as creationists. Is we have to battle. We have to battle when secular scientists say things that they call facts and they aren't actually facts. They call them observable science when nobody's observed them. I mean, this is the battle, you know? I hope you're seeing this, David. I mean, he's doing his best to be honest.
By the way, if I could respond to that real quick.
Yeah.
Dr. Snelling is not an honest man, and I can prove that too, is that while he was working for Answers in Genesis and preaching his young earth creationism, he was actually getting his stuff published in peer-reviewed journals. And he states, this is one of the, quote, verbatim, the Archean basement consists of domes of granoids and granite genesis near the outcrop being 5 kilometers to the north. Some of the lowermost overlying the Proterozoic Metasapiens were accredited to these domes during the raid at about 1,087 to 1,800 billion years ago. So when Dr. Snelling publishes in this secular literature, he agrees with the millions of years timescale. And another one, so he's actually in his own peer-reviewed paper that he's published while working for Answers in Genesis, actually pretty much states and admits that this was about 1870 to 1,800 million years ago. And I find that so dishonest.
Can I ask a question, Anthony?
Ed?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. What does it matter if there's dishonesty in your worldview? I'm trying to figure this out because you have went. I said it last time, and I'll say it this time. You're trying to kill somebody by 1,000 cuts of paper. I mean, you have went to every single source, but you will not admit that any one of them could have been speculating, hypothesizing, that any of them could be wrong in any of their studies or anything. It's just the massive dump of everyone has said this. However, I want to know, what's your outcome here? Are you actually trying to get us to worship science as if we don't have a standard for truth? I mean, the reason I'm asking this is because you spent an hour and 20 minutes and then 2 hours last time, and the only thing you've done is dumped out load after load after load of conversation with all of these other papers. And then here at the end, you're saying, well, I care about truth. What does truth matter in your worldview? Can you define where is a moral standard here?
All right, sure. So look, the truth is what the facts are, and the facts are what the evidence shows. And the evidence is found by doing the research, and the researchers then go on and publish their results in the peer-reviewed journals. The point that I'm trying to make here is that we have an objective way of actually determining reality, and that is through the scientific method and rigorous testing and all of that. So here's the thing, and I can cite many more examples of creationist dishonesty, but would you actually agree that it is dishonest to be preaching young earth creationism while publishing in the peer-reviewed literature that, yeah, this is definitely millions and millions of years old? Do you find that dishonest?
I knew you were going to go down that road.
Yeah, no.
Go ahead.
No, I mean, I'll say, is it dishonest? Depends on the context. He could say this is what secular scientists say.
Yeah.
That's not
what he's. Let me
ask you a question. You're talking about honesty. This is a question I had from your opening. You made a statement. So you made the statement that a meteor hit the Earth and caused the dinosaurs to go extinct, correct?
Yes, that is correct. And this has been pretty proven. We know that we have the shock crystals, we have the crater.
Okay, so here's a simple question: who saw that?
No one.
Okay, so don't pretend that you're doing science.
Exactly.
Okay, you're trying to set yourself up on a moral high ground, and what did you do? You're using philosophy and calling it science, and this is what people do. That's dishonest. Every time you try to take what Anthony was referring to as historical science, that's philosophy. That's not science. You're in a totally different field of study, and then you act like you got this moral high ground, and you say everyone else is dishonest. Well, every time you do that, you're proving your own dishonesty. And every time you read the papers of people that are doing that, that's their dishonesty.
Exactly.
All right, if I can respond to that real quick. Can I respond to that real quick?
Sure.
I'm going to do what is called a reductio ad absurdum to show why this analogy is completely wrong and all that. So imagine, you will, if we have...
Before you do it, I'm just going to make a prediction. Watch, folks. We're going to get a non sequitur. We're going to get something that has nothing to do with what I said, but go ahead.
Sure. So imagine, if we will, we're detectives in a murder case. We have the murder. Who actually saw that murder? We didn't see that eyewitness. We don't have any eyewitnesses. So what do you call that? Historical science? Nobody saw it. What we can do is we can take the pieces. We can say, okay, we have DNA evidence. We got the gun, we got fingerprints that all point to this guy being the murderer. We don't have to, it would be laughable if a guy got up in court and said he is being the historical science person. Nobody was actually there. They're just interpreting the evidence in that light. So the thing is, we have a very good way of actually looking at what happened in the past.
And what is that called? 1
second, real quick. We see okay, we have this evidence of these fossils. We have the evidence of the impact crater. We have these quark crystals, and all around the world is a layer of uranium that marks the KT boundary.
Okay, I got to ask a question. I got to jump right in because you're jumping all over the place to try to prove your argument. And I'm going to tell you, I was a police officer for 8 years. Okay, what you're talking about?
hold on
What you're talking about is forensic science.
Hey, Justin, hold on one second.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, David, I mean, are you okay with them talking to you right now? I have no problem sitting back and letting them.
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay. I just want to make sure. I want to be respectful to David, and thank you for being on again tonight. I mean, this is a great topic.
I've really enjoyed this conversation.
I did want to try to shift, but I don't know if we're going to get to it. But
yeah, we're probably not going to get to shift. So Justin, go ahead and because I know you sat in that class.
I was going to ask what kind of
2 weeks ago to understand this really well, because forensic science goes by another name too.
Yeah. Well, and now think about this. We're talking about, when you're talking about forensic sciences, you're talking about the measurable and testable, using the repeatable data. Now, when you start dealing with here and now, you can do it in a forensic way to do a limited history data. Now, here's the problem with it. Okay, you talked about your historical data points and everything else. Here's the problem with it. After a certain period of time, that's why we have cold cases, because we can't figure out who did what and why they did it, and we can't figure out the narrative of what went on. So in other words, when you start talking about the empirical sciences of your scientific data that's going on today, measurable, testable, repeatable events, and then you try to jam those two with historical data and historical science, you're lying. You're being disingenuous and you're being dishonest. Now, I'm not trying to be mean to you, but I'm going to point it out this way. I've sat here for 2 episodes and I watched you do this one thing. Let me pull this up.
And this is hard for Justin to do, by the way, to sit back and not talk.
You don't understand how hard it is. I'm a pastor and I don't ever not talk. But when you talked about the 3 critical thinking questions, you didn't one time say, these aren't my questions. These came from a gentleman here. You didn't one time say they were anybody else's. You acted as if it was yours.
Well, I do apologize.
Okay.
I'll own that. I will apologize to that.
Okay.
If you felt that was a little bit dishonest on my part.
But
no, I should have.
But my point is this: when you take things that don't belong to you, okay, moral, immoral, whatever else, and the thing is you're trying to stand on a moral high ground. And you're trying to hold on to, this peer-reviewed paper, and yet you deny the very fact that there are other peers within the scientific community that are just as well educated and just as well studied who disagree, even within the atheistic community, the Big Bang cosmology community, all these different theories. You act as if there's a uniform teaching that no one can disagree with this one thing. And if we do, then you must be a whack job creationist. And I'm sorry, but as creationists, we will sit here and say, we don't know everything. And we do not try to take a moral high ground that the scriptures don't take. We're not trying to take a philosophical high ground that the scriptures don't take. And I'm just going to leave it at that for a moment. So
David didn't do a non sequitur, but he also actually didn't do a reducing to absurdity. But you did prove my point very well, that you're not doing science in your example.
100%.
You're doing philosophy. It's a forensic science. You're taking a look at the evidence you have, and you're trying to guess a storyline or a narrative to figure out, does the evidence lead to who done it?
Yep.
And that's what we do, and that's how it's done.
And that's not that is not the scientific method, is it?
Like the entire the scientific method is make an observation and create hypotheses and do experimentation. So we have this dead body. Who did this? That's the question.
Okay. You're at a dead body.
You recreate that dead body?
Well, that's what we want to figure out. How did this dead body get here?
No. See, notice what he just did, folks. Notice what he did, right? I asked, can he recreate the dead body? And he just went to dishonesty in going, oh, well, that's what we did. No, those are 2 different things. Well, I mean, you are better in the sense than your friend Leo, who's just completely arrogant and ignorant. He may have studied what other people have said and he can regurgitate it well. You at least were trying to engage with Anthony. You were trying to say, okay, let me hear what you're saying. That is good. But you still struggle with the same ignorant arrogance that he struggles with to a certain level. And I'm saying that not to be insulting, but to help you, because you're never going to come to truth as long as you're going to use confirmation bias as your measurement for everything. Exactly. If you're going to ignore everything that doesn't fit with what you want to be true, you're never going to come to truth. And Anthony even tried to point that out to you with Andrew Snelling, who's saying, I don't understand this, but this is what I'm seeing. You're not doing that. When you get to things that it's like, well, this guy says it, this guy says it. Well, that's appealing to authority. I mean, I've called out several of the different logical fallacies that you've done. So here's a really simple thing. If you have to use logical fallacies, then your arguments are invalid.
Yep.
Okay?
That is called the fallacy, by the way, assuming that the conclusion is invalid because there is a logical fallacy.
No, it's the way logic works. See, the way logic works is when you make an argument that's logically valid, right? Then you have a valid argument. When you make one invalid, in other words, you use a fallacy to make your point, it's invalid. That's the way logic works.
See, what he's trying to say to you is that when you started talking about, well, we've got a dead body, okay? And you start talking about historical sciences where you can actually, in the present, look at the dead body and determine certain aspects.
Right.
You can't tell, how much the guy liked to jog.
Right, of course.
Based on dead
and that's
body.
not the point. The point is...
Wait a second. Hold on. The point is if you go back 6,000 years, you don't have a dead body. Okay? You don't have a dead body. You have speculation. You're thinking, oh, this is what the dinosaur looked like, and this is what he ate, and this is, this was his best friend, and they went fishing over here in this pond. And I'm being hysterical about it, or crazy about it. But the point is just like the you can't tell if this guy was running or not, or how much he liked to run. You can't tell anything about that dinosaur other than he has bones. Okay, and so the point is, you don't have the bones to tell us everything that you're speculating. You're basically trying to make up a narrative to fit the story that you already have come up with.
Yeah, and that's what confirmation bias is. But
exactly.
So David, I want to get into some things you said last week.
Okay, sure.
So you said you're Jewish. What type of Judaism?
I'm kind of Reform Humanist Judaism now.
Okay. So it'd be more of like a Reform Judaism?
Yes.
Okay. All right. You said textual criticism is what got you to not believe Christianity was true. Can you define textual criticism?
Yes, textual criticism is the method of comparing the manuscripts and figuring out, okay, let's piece this together. Okay, which one goes here, which one doesn't. Here are the textual variations, which one best fits what the original might have said.
Okay. So for folks that want to know the actual definition, textual criticism is the science to get back to the original words of a manuscript or of a document. In the case of the Bible, it's to try to get back to the original words and meaning of the manuscript. The dealing with variants are an byproduct of it. It's not the definition. So, okay. So how do we do textual criticism?
Sure. So we can look at all the various manuscripts. Okay, which one is older? Which one is more recent? Which one? What is the most likely answer to what the original text said?
What does the age have to do with anything?
Well, the earlier ones are probably going to be more reliable than the later ones.
Why?
Because they're closer to the original source.
Okay, and how would that play out then?
So again, look at what the earlier manuscripts say and all of that. So if the earlier manuscripts leave out this verse, but the later manuscripts added in, you can kind of conclude, okay, maybe this was added in later. Maybe a scribal person decided to add in like the story of the Percope adultery when it does not exist in the earlier manuscripts. And when the Gospel of Mark, the last couple of verses, also has some serious problems. The earlier manuscripts do not contain the last portion of Mark, and other manuscripts have a completely different ending to it. So,
okay. Let me try to clean that up for you. The reason for the age is that over time, people will make copies, handwritten copies, the later the time, the more chance of having a scribal error occur.
Correct.
Okay? That's why the earlier manuscripts usually seem to be the ones that we're going to go with, but that's not the only thing. So what else do we use in this area of science called textual criticism?
Sure. So one of the other things we could do is look at the quotations from the early church fathers and say, okay, how did they quote this verse, or if they quoted it at all?
Okay, and how does that play out? How does that help them?
Sure. So if we have, there's an unknown verse here, we can look to the church fathers to say if the church fathers in the early first couple centuries were quoting this verse, that means that this has a limiting factor of when this verse had to be written. So,
okay. And for folks who are watching, just so you know, early church fathers are not really used in textual criticism other than a tertiary type of study, because of the fact that most of the early church fathers were paraphrasing, quoting from memory, so they wouldn't be relied on for textual criticism for that reason. What are some of the other ways that we would do this science?
Trying to think. We would, I guess, appeal to tradition from the different churches.
Okay, that's again, that would be not in the realm of what we would use for textual criticism. That would be just like in the last category, the early church fathers, where we would put that as it's giving support, but it's not the primary way of doing it.
Okay.
So there's three areas. Okay. And I'm asking these questions because if this is something that was so convincing to you that you were convinced Christianity was wrong, and don't understand the study of it, then you really are, every time you say textual criticism proved to you that Christianity was wrong, and yet you don't understand what textual criticism actually is, whether in definition or in the study of the science of it, how we do it, it exposes that every time you make that statement, because I know, honesty is important to you, every time you say that, you're telling a lie, because you don't understand textual criticism well enough to make that statement that convinced you. Maybe you read some books from Bart Ehrman, and because it seems what you do a lot is you read what others say, you adapt it for yourself, and then say, well, that's proof. That's it. Everything's right there because someone you agree with said something, and yet you only read one side is going to be my guess. What are the two factors when you talk about a variant? What are the two issues with variances? Do you know what?
Yeah, sure. So in all reality, the vast majority of variants are rather meaningless. It's mostly a spelling variance, which doesn't even change the meaning. And most of the time, it can't even be translated.
Mm-hmm. And so 75% are spelling.
And then a lot of the other ones, I guess, are getting words backwards. Like instead of Jesus Christ, it says Christ Jesus, correct?
Word ordering, things like that. So we're going to use this in terms of what's called viable and meaningful. Okay. Meaningful means that the meaning changed.
Correct. And can I get an example of that?
Sure. I'll give you, actually, I had an example that I'm going to be preaching this Sunday that's both meaningful and viable. But you have one you want to give, you're saying?
Yeah. One that is actually very meaningful and viable is in the chapter of Mark, at the very end of Mark chapter 1, Jesus heals a leper, and there's a textual variation of whether or not he was angry or compassionate, because the way that you read that text really changes if you read it as compassion or anger. That's
and that one actually, we would end up saying that the word would be anger,
correct, because
of the fact that the compassion seems to soften it, which means that you probably have someone who wrote something in and softened it. So,
and that's actually what the one of the things that I love about the next Bible, the NET second edition, is that it actually does really go in depth. One second, real quick. 1 second.
Yeah, it explains. It has the NET New English Translation is a very good translation, because what it's going to do, Daniel Wallace is the editor. This is his specialty is textual criticism. So what you're going to get with an NET Bible is you're getting basically the reasons, the argumentation for choosing one word in English over another. However, the question becomes, that one may be viable, but is it meaningful? In other words, the meaning, what's being communicated in that particular passage is the fact that there was a great amount of emotion involved, and both words convey that. So that one word is not changing the meaning of the context around it. Okay, so that is maybe a viable one. Viable meaning we can't get back to the original. Meaningful meaning that the meaning changed. So let me give you the example from Bart Ehrman. Now, if you're going to write a New York Times bestseller, David, would you agree that you want to put your best argument forward?
Of course you do. If you want to be taken seriously, yeah, you have to put your best foot forward and evaluate it correctly.
Right.
It might not sell well, but if you want to be taken seriously, you should put your best foot forward and put in the best arguments. And I actually do criticize Bart Ehrman. Pretty much, I have seen some of his debates where where I know he says it's wrong, or what he's saying I know is wrong. I think in one of his debates in the early resurrection and all, when he talks about the earliest sources being the Gospels, which of course is not true. We have evidence of the earliest sources are actually Paul's own writing, where he talks about the resurrection. So the Gospels are not the earliest sources for the resurrection. So that's something that Bart Ehrman gets wrong.
And which book is the earliest that talks about the resurrection?
I think I can't think of right off the top of my head. I want to say Colossians or Romans, one or the other, because there's a statement by Paul that
either one of those. There were two Gospels written before either one of those, so maybe you might need to find a different book.
Yeah, sure. So I know I kind of date the earliest Gospel is Mark. That's for sure.
How do you know that's for sure?
Well, for one thing, that's what all the scholars agree on.
No, all the scholars don't agree on that. All the liberal scholars do. Do you know why they agree on that?
Well, because Mark is the least embellished and is probably the most.
An assumption that they all embellished it.
And another thing is the other Gospels seem to be using Mark as a source.
Okay, so you believe they used it as a source?
Yeah, not necessarily a bad thing.
So let me ask you a question. Is there, what are the sources that we would have that Joe Biden is president-elect?
Well, we have the entire news media, pretty much every single.
Who'd they copy it from?
Each from the Associated, pretty much from the Associated Press when they called it for Biden.
Well, then why don't they all have the same map as the Associated Press?
Well, they do.
No, they don't. Some have Arizona called, some don't. Some have Georgia, some don't.
Well, yeah, that's because they have different methods for.
So, wouldn't it make more sense that they're all looking at the same data, that is being from the counties, and they're all, if you watch any channel election night, they're all calling different states at different times. They're not doing it based on what the others are saying. They're doing it based on the fact that they're all going back to the original source. They're going back to the counties and looking at the numbers, or they're going to the polling that they do after the exits, when people exit from from voting, right? They're all looking at that. When they write their stories, they're coming up. If Biden gives a message, he gets up and speaks. How come they all have similarity in all the papers when they report on what Biden said?
Oh, because they're quoting him from one another. Because they're quoting him verbatim.
No, but yet they're not quoting him verbatim. They're explaining the events that occur. Why? Because they were eyewitnesses. Some of those articles are going to be longer than others. Some are going to include details that others won't. So the idea that there has to be
a source, Mark, which, the reason that they say Mark is the earliest is because it's the shortest. They also think that there's one called Q or Quellum.
Yeah,
where
I actually strongly disagree with the Q source hypothesis,
Well, you have to, because there's no evidence of it.
which is why I disagree with it.
Yet you hold on to arguments that are based on QLM. So the thing, though, is here, and I want you to see this. What you end up arguing is that you had to have Mark written first. Why? You said because the others embellished it. And yet you wouldn't do that same thing with any article written today on any event that you have in papers. Why? Because there are eyewitnesses to an event and they all report it differently. Matthew probably was the first gospel.
Well, just out of curiosity, why do you consider Matthew the first gospel?
Because Matthew is written to Jewish people. And if it was written later, it wouldn't make any sense to when Christianity was no longer having so much of a Jewish influence. It wouldn't make sense to write to Jewish people later when there's not the Jewish influence. So it makes the most sense that Matthew is the first one written, because Matthew was written to a Jewish audience, which would put it earlier in the life of the church.
Okay, and that's it. And wasn't John also written to a Jews? I can't remember what audience John was writing for.
No, John wrote much later. He would have been the last of the four Gospels. All of his writings are at the end. So here's an example of what Bart Ehrman gives for the best argument for something to say that we cannot know what the Bible means. This is out of Mark chapter 6, verse 3. When Jesus comes to his hometown and they say, "Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James, Joseph, and Judas, and Simon?" So the issue that he brings up, and there's a textual variant here, some of the manuscripts will say that Jesus is the son of a carpenter, and some say he's the carpenter.
Right.
Now, we cannot get back to the original. We don't know which one this actually said, and it does change the meaning. He's either a carpenter or the son of a carpenter. He could be both. That is an option. However, here's the simple question, and Bart Ehrman even says this in his paperback edition, first edition paperback of his book, Misquoting Jesus. In the epilogue, now they removed it from the second edition, but in the first edition, he admitted there is not a single Christian doctrine that is affected by any of these variants. So you made the statement that because of textual criticism, you knew Christianity was wrong. Yet experts in the field, even those that disagree with Christianity, acknowledge that there's not a single Christian doctrine that's affected by any of these variants. So how exactly could something that doesn't affect any of the teaching of Christianity convince you that Christianity is wrong?
That's an excellent question. So obviously the Word of God is, if the Bible is the Word of God, it would be perfect and free from error. It would be it had to be infallible. And if there are some of these significant issues like the pericope adulterae and the last ending of Mark, how can it be perfect?
Oh, that's easily answered, because you made a mistake there.
Okay, what's the mistake?
We're not looking at the original, are we?
Yeah. So
okay. So
what did it be? So here's the question.
The original, it was without error and without flaw.
So if I could respond to that real quick, here's the thing: was God not powerful enough to make sure that His word was free from error? Couldn't God? Certainly, God would have saw it fit to make sure that the autograph is perfect and preserved, and that I'm sure if God was powerful, if was all powerful, He could do that.
Okay, and again, you said the autograph. In the autograph, we would say yes. We're not looking at the autograph, though.
Yeah. So if I can
copies that were written, that were copied by men.
Right. So if I can draw an analogy real quick, imagine if the United States Constitution was written 2,000 years ago, and all what we had were these later fragments, and they all said one said that the Second Amendment shall not be infringed, and another says shall be infringed, and another. So this is the stuff that I'm struggling with personally.
Well, clearly, the shall not would be wrong.
Yeah.
The way you worded it, but no, I got to say one thing before Andrew answers, David. I'm dead serious about this. You know more about Christianity than most Christians I talk to, even in good churches.
I agree.
That
I mean, be honest with us. What's going on in your life that is causing you to continually, willfully reject the God you know exists? What sin are you holding on to? What package of sins are you holding on to? What is going on? I mean, I honestly,
or what happened to you in church?
Yeah,
growing up.
I am so disturbed by listening to you, a nice guy who's full of knowledge, who's clearly running from the God he knows exists.
Mm-hmm.
You know the stuff what we're talking about is true. You know the stuff you're talking about is a bunch of hooey. Like, I can tell, I can read it in your eyes. What?
Well, that's not a very good argument.
No, I know that, but I mean, seriously, I'm not trying to make a good argument right now. I'm trying to appeal to David, who obviously has knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
One of
the questions I wanted to ask you, since you brought it up, is, my question is, what happened to you when you were growing up in church?
Yeah.
Like what do you mean? What happened?
I'm assuming, and the reason I'm assuming this is because this almost always is the case. When I see someone that understands Christianity and says they grew up in a church, especially if it's an IFB church, because I think, is that correct? You grew up Independent Fundamentalist Baptist? Is that what?
Yes, that is correct.
So
ruined Andrew too, by the way. He grew up IFB. So.
Well, no, I didn't grow up IFB. I grew up Jewish.
Yeah.
Would either of you guys consider yourself IFB now, just out of curiosity?
I would be fundamental. Let's put it this way. I'd be an independent, I'd be a fundamentalist, and I'd be a Baptist, but I wouldn't be part of the IFB.
There you go.
He's a fundy. as Frank used to say, he's a fundy.
So the question is, did something happen to you growing up in church? Is it a very legalistic church and you're responding to that? Did something happen in church? Because typically that's what I end up seeing, is that typically people like you that I come across are really rebelling against their upbringing.
Yeah.
All right. Perhaps this should be a better topic off air.
Yeah. And that
I would rather talk about that off the air if you.
Yeah, we can do that. That's fine.
We could do that. Yeah,
we'll
I do want to do that. So let me finish with what we're saying then. So here's the thing. When you saying that textual criticism convinced you that Christianity is wrong, and yet experts in the field admit that there's no doctrine that's affected. Now, if you bring up, the autographs were without error. And you're saying, could God have kept them? Could God have preserved them? So let me use the words that you want to use. The word would be preserve.
Okay.
So you're saying, could God have preserved it? Yes, he could have, had he wanted to. However, unlike Islam, now Islam has a problem because Islam says that God did preserve the original in Arabic.
Right, and of course they're wrong.
Have variances, huh?
Yeah, and the Qurans do have variants. But what is interesting actually is that there was a Quran that is carbon dated to the life of Muhammad. We don't have anything like that for Christianity. We don't have any major fragments of the New Testament that dates back to the time of the New Testament.
That's not exactly true.
No.
We have two manuscripts, one very small that is dated about the time of John.
P52, right?
Well, P52 is going to be P52 is about, I think, 135 AD. Right. So that's going to be one generation.
Very early second century, probably second generation.
Yeah. but we do have there are some discoveries of within the 80s, which could still be within the time of John's writings. Now, here's the thing: we also have a ton of manuscripts that haven't been cataloged. All right, so there's certain things we're going to look for if we're going to look for a manuscript that may be dated to the original.
Right.
To the original. They're not going to have punctuation. They're not going to have verses, things like that.
Because all those came later. It was kind of more like the original kind of like was more reading like a novel without any chapters or divisions or anything like that.
Yeah. One of the things you're going to see is whether it's in a scroll or a book. One of the only times Christianity was ahead of the curve technology-wise was that Christianity was the first ones to put things in book form, because it was easier to carry than scrolls. But but here's the thing. When we look at the textual criticism, when you look at all the variances, now God never said he was going to preserve his word letter by letter in its copies. It was never said. Okay? So the issue is that as they were copied, yes, there were mistakes, errors made by the copyist. Why? For a very simple reason. Because the people that were making the copies were in a rush because the message was so important. They wanted that message to get out as widely as they could. And so copying was a process that done in the Old Testament was a very tedious, slow process. But the message of Jesus Christ was so important that they wanted to get it out everywhere. Now, the advantage is that's why we have so many manuscripts. So you mentioned the date when it comes to textual criticism. When we do textual criticism, the date is one factor. A second factor is where it is in the world, okay, geographically. Why? Because if you see, everywhere in Egypt has the same reading and everywhere else in the world doesn't have that reading, you start to assume that, okay, this is not the proper reading because it was something that only affected this area.
And that's a safe assumption to make. One of my fourth question: how warranted is the assumption? So that's a good example of an assumption that is quite warranted.
That's quite warranted, right?
Same way with the indignation, it's quite warranted to assume that it will be softened rather than hardened. So these are what I'm talking about with the safe assumptions.
Yeah, and now so there's one other thing that you want to look at, and that's the number of manuscripts. The reason the number of manuscripts is important is because the number of manuscripts help us to see, especially when we start to see how many of these have variances and things, we can start to see if someone made something word order different here or there. Okay, we can start to say, okay, how many of the manuscripts have that? The other thing the number of manuscripts tell us is the more manuscripts we have, the more we end up looking at basically where the variances are. We have so many manuscripts now that it's not, when we find more manuscripts, we don't find more variances as much anymore.
Right, and there's more manuscripts for the New Testament than any other book in antiquity, not even close.
Not even close, okay? And not only that, we have the dating so close. I know, Anthony, I'm like shocked because he understands that. Yeah, because most Christians don't. We also have them so much closer. I mean, you look at Julius Caesar, no one questions the events of Julius Caesar.
Right.
And the closest document we have from the writing to the time it occurred is like 1,500 years.
Right.
Okay. Yet we have manuscripts of the Bible we have a lot within the first 300 years. We have, I think it's about 318 manuscripts within the first 300 years. So we have a lot of early ones. Now, when we put all that together, what we end up with is the fact that none of this affects doctrine. So you end up looking, and I did the numbers. If you get my book, what do they believe, or what do we believe? I actually ran the numbers of all the textual variances in the different manuscripts. Okay, and it's 99.98% accurate as a conservative number. Now, why am I saying a conservative number? We basically are looking, if you take the most conservative number used is that 1% of those variances are viable and meaningful. And that's the most important category, because that's the category that would tell us we can't get back to the original and the meaning changed. Not a single one of them affects any Christian doctrine. It's things like being a carpenter or the son of a carpenter. Both can be true in that example, but that doesn't affect any Christian doctrine.
Yeah. By the way, one thing that I would say that I think does affect Christian doctrine is, I think maybe you could give me one of the examples that you think would be in the Gospel of Luke. Does it say, does Jesus say, which is poured out for you or not? That's would you agree that that's meaningful?
Which verse are you thinking? Only because I can't speak to Son. I don't.
Let's see here. Which is word for you? But while I'm looking that up, okay, here we go. It's Luke 22:20. This is a cup poured out for you in the new covenant. Looks like the NET does not have any notes with that. This is a cup poured out for you, but I do know that there is that issue.
Okay, maybe on another week we could look at that. Only because I'm not familiar with the variant, so I'd have to go look it up.
Yeah. So what would you think is a viable, meaningful, and viable?
Well, I gave you one is, whether he's the son of a carpenter or a carpenter.
Yeah.
The meaning actually changes. If he's the son of a carpenter, it's referring to his father, right, being the carpenter, or is he the actual carpenter? We can't get back to the original, but again, it gets back to that there's no doctrine affected by this. So the study of textual criticism ends up supporting Christianity, not diminishing it. So when you say that it convinced you that Christianity is wrong, and yet we end up looking at this and seeing that when we put all the evidence together, it shows that the Bible we have today is very accurate. Now, I gave you the number of 1%. In a class I was in with Dr. Dan Wallace, who is an expert in this field, okay, he says that the number, with all the new manuscripts we have and all the new, because most people are still using the numbers from the 80s, we have about 8,000 manuscripts now, not 5,000. And as we've looked at them, we end up looking, and that's the manuscripts in Greek, by the way, that when we end up looking at them, we end up realizing he says the number is 1/5 of 1%. So we're talking a small number. I mean, if you put up the scientists that you hold to and you believe, even though they keep changing their conclusions year over year, and yet the more we study the scriptures, the more it's getting more accurate.
If I could respond to that real quick, isn't that a good thing if scientists find more data that and they're forced to revise their conclusions based on the new data? Don't you think that's a good thing?
Well, the issue there is when they say that something is absolute and they know it to be true because they've done the science, and then it's proven to be false, and then they say the new thing is absolute. I mean, we don't teach ethos anymore. Einstein proved there was no ethos, but that was an absolute. You've made statements that you make absolute statements, and you say it as if you know it to be true. And so the thing is when you do that, okay, and yet you're then saying, but the Bible's wrong. But the more we study the Bible, the more support it says for its accuracy. You don't have that with the science, right? The science that you're using, and when I say the science, I'm talking the philosophy of science, not actual science. But when we have the philosophy of science, what you end up seeing is, oh, this is true. Nope, that's not true. Now this is true.
Well, and it builds on top of each other, and it's always continuously building, rather than looking at it and saying this is an error.
Yes.
We're going to discard that, and we're going to look for a different pathway. We say this is an error. Oh, but let's build on top of that because we've got the articles.
Well, let me just someone corrected. I said the wrong word here, so I meant ether, not ethos. So okay. Thank you for the correction there. So you see, the point is that I'm questioning how you could say that textual criticism could convince you that Christianity is wrong when that's a leap. And I'm trying to figure that leap out.
If I could respond to that, I think it's that. I think looking back, I think there's a lot of different factors, textual criticism, and including contradictions in the New Testament and in the Bible that I think do matter. And we could get into that maybe in a different stream because we're already over 2 hours.
So and I always hear about contradictions, and yet no one can ever name. I actually have gone through and seen a list on an atheist website of 400 contradictions in the Bible.
Yeah, by the way,
one of them was.
Yeah, but I think a lot of atheists don't even know what a contradiction is.
Mm-hmm.
A contradiction is when you have two statements that cannot both be true at the same time.
Correct.
So
if you have one account talking about 10 lepers that were healed and one account that talks about one leper that was healed, it doesn't mean the other 9 weren't healed. It just means that he's dealing with the one.
Right, and it's the same way. It is the same way also with Matthew and Luke. Matthew was to focus on the wise men. Luke was to focus on the shepherds. Those are not contradictions.
Correct. Yeah. So maybe we all, it would be good to go through what you see as the contradictions in the Bible. And that might be an interesting discussion. I definitely was curious because I thought that I heard, and maybe I got it either from Anthony or Justin or just assumed it from the stuff that you guys were sending back and forth. But for some reason, I thought someone said that you were an Orthodox Jewish person, that you were in Orthodox Judaism.
I was Orthodox, yes, but I am not Orthodox anymore.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say because I mean right off the bat I saw the show last week and went, he's not wearing a kippah, he's not Orthodox.
He used to be Orthodox, so I'm not Orthodox anymore for a host of reasons. But that's a different topic for a different day.
Yeah. Well, we'll end out the show. Let me just first David, give you a chance to say any closing comments that you want to, then Anthony, and then we'll close out and don't drop off too quickly because we'll want to chat offline maybe.
We'll chat a little bit offline. By the way, I will say that there is, for those who are interested in open mic after show coming on my channel right after this, probably a few minutes after this stream ends is when my after show will begin. It's a time for open discussion and just whatever. So y'all are invited as well. But I do want to speak to you guys.
What's your show?
Yeah, no, I'll put the link in because I just grabbed it.
Okay.
It's just an open mic night, open topic.
Okay, so I just dropped the link into the after show.
Yep.
Of course, Twitter may mark it as spam.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with Twitter.
Yeah. All right. So David, any closing comments you want to make?
No, just thank you guys so much for having me back on. Definitely love to come back to talk about maybe. I don't want to kind of filibuster the time with 52 contradictions, so maybe we can take a look at the 4 contradictions that I think are most damning to Christianity. So I think that would be a good place to start, and all of that. Would you guys like that?
Yeah, send them over to me. Anthony, any closing comments?
Yeah, you know what? As always, people don't reject God because of science; they reject God because of their sin. And I mean, it's the bottom line. And one of the things that I know Andrew and I we both teach on in evangelism is that we can't convince people based on the science, and it's because that we always have different starting points, and our different starting points are going to cause us to look at the exact same things, the exact same evidence, and come to different conclusions based on our starting points. And it's clear, today and last time that David and I look at the exact same evidence today and have different conclusions. So it's not about the science. I love talking about the science. I think it's a lot of fun, and I choose to do that and not do precept, which I prefer precept. But we do the evidences because we want people to learn and see that it's the good science out there is all in favor of Christianity. Every bit of it is. And we can show that time and time and time again. Having said all that, I just ask for people to pray for David because he obviously has a ton of knowledge. David is running from God. I don't know why. And I just pray that God grants him repentance and faith and brings him into the kingdom. Because if I see the type of zeal I see today and last week with him, well, he could be what an amazing apologist for God. So yeah, that's it.
And, we're going to end out the show. David, we appreciate you coming in. I think that kind of with what Anthony was saying, how I wanted to end is you don't have an evidence problem. You have a spiritual problem. And I think that what you display, and I want to say this in a way that you understand. This is, I want you to understand the most important thing is where you're going to spend eternity. Okay. Eternity is a very long time to be wrong. And to run from God, what I see you doing is I see you grabbing lots of things from lots of people, grabbing lots of papers and things, but it seems you're reading one side of an argument. And you're looking at everything through, it seems, a lens where, you may be struggling with confirmation bias. Now, that's something you have to decide on your own. You have to examine yourself. But the reality is, David, you and I both rightly deserve eternity in the lake of fire because both of us break God's law. Okay? Both of us. And neither one of us deserve eternal life. God himself provided that. God himself came to earth and died in our place. And the thing I don't want to have you hear the moment you die is to hear the judgment of God. I want to see you come to repentance. Does that mean your friends will ridicule you? Yes, it does. Probably will, but the reality is you have to recognize what is truth. And when we run from God, we're running from truth because we can't know truth apart from God. God is the source of truth. So what's true is what purports to his nature. So when we ignore him or run from him, we're actually running from the truth. Because there is no way to say, well, we have truth without him. To say, okay, well, this is the way the facts are. And yet what we saw throughout the whole night was an interpretation of facts and calling it truth. Instead of saying, well, this is what is actually the facts actually are. See, there's a lot of philosophy in there. And that's the thing that I see a lot with you. So I'm praying, I ask everyone else to pray that David and Leo as well would come to repentance. Our concern is where you spend eternity. I think that the conversation was good and it should continue. But we're going to be praying for your soul. So that's all we have for tonight for Apologetics Live. Next week, we're going to do something. I just don't have my schedule in front of me. So
Thanksgiving.
Oh, no, we're not doing anything next week.
We're going to be eating Thanksgiving dinner.
Alone, because you're not allowed to do it with family.
Yeah, watch.
So, okay.
Everybody's invited to my house.
And, but we will have one the week after. I just don't remember the topic. But so no show next week. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.